The crying didn't sound like it belonged out there, and that was the first thing that made Ethan Cole stop. It drifted across the dry morning air, thin and uneven, the kind of sound that didn't ask for help so much as wait to see if help was still possible. He stood still beside the water trough, one hand resting on sun-warmed wood, listening as the sound came again. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. Ethan hadn't seen another person on his land in weeks. The ranch sat a long ride from town, far enough that most folks didn't wander by unless they were lost or desperate. He shaded his eyes and scanned the yard. Dust lay thick over the ground, untouched except for his own boot prints and the slow tracks of cattle. Then he saw her, small and folded in on herself near the fence line, her knees pulled to her chest like she was trying to disappear. She froze when she noticed him, as if crying had been a mistake. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her hair tangled and tied back with a ribbon that had lost its color. She looked too thin for the heat, too quiet for her age. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he hadn't let himself name in a long time. He approached slowly, hands open, his voice low. He knew how sudden movements could scare animals, and this felt no different. "Hey there," he said. "You're all right. I won't come any closer." The girl studied him with wide, careful eyes. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was small but steady, like she'd practiced being brave. "I didn't mean to be here," she said. "That's okay," Ethan replied. "You can be here." That seemed to matter. She relaxed just enough to lower her knees, though she kept her hands clenched in her lap. Ethan noticed her shoes were dusty but intact, not worn through the way they would be if she'd walked far on her own. That detail stayed with him. "My name's Lucy," she said after a moment. "Mama said not to talk to strangers, but I don't know where else to go." Ethan nodded. "You did the right thing," he said, though he wasn't sure why yet. "I'm Ethan. Do you know where your mama is?" Lucy swallowed. Her eyes dropped to the ground. When she spoke again, the words came out slower, like each one weighed something. "She was with me. We were near the canyon. I got tired, so she told me to wait by a rock. She said she'd be right back." Ethan had walked that canyon more times than he could count. He knew its paths and shadows, how sound moved strangely there, how time could stretch longer than it should. He felt a quiet shift inside himself, the sense that this moment was already pulling him somewhere he hadn't planned to go. "I waited," Lucy continued. Then it got quiet. Too quiet. She hesitated, then added, "I went looking. I found her shoes." That made him kneel without thinking. He brought himself down to her level, careful not to crowd her. "You found her shoes?" he asked. She nodded, blinking hard. "They were by the edge, like she took them off. I thought maybe she was playing, but Mama doesn't play like that." Her voice broke just a little. "I found a button, too, from her coat." Ethan felt the morning heat fade as something colder settled in. Shoes didn't get left behind by accident. Not like that. Not near a canyon. "Did you see anyone else?" he asked gently. Lucy frowned, searching her memory. "There was a man," she said. "He talked real nice. Called her ma'am and smiled, but Mama didn't smile back. She told me to stay close after that." Polite, Ethan thought. The wrong kind of polite. The kind that asks for nothing but expects everything. Lucy twisted the ribbon in her hair. "I waited as long as I could," she said. "Then I got scared." "You did good," Ethan said again, more firmly this time. "You did exactly what you should have done." He stood and looked out toward the dusty road that led back toward town. then toward the distant line where the land broke into stone and shadow. He understood in that moment that this wasn't just about finding someone who was lost. It was about choosing what kind of man he was willing to be when a child stood alone on his land and asked for help without asking at all. Ethan held out his hand. "Let's get you some water," he said. "Then you can tell me everything you remember." Lucy took his hand. Her grip was tight. And as they walked toward the house, Ethan already knew the quiet days he'd built around himself were over. The canyon looked different when Ethan rode toward it with Lucy sitting behind him on the horse. It always had. From a distance, it was just a break in the land, a long scar of stone and shadow cutting through the desert. Up close, it felt like a place that kept secrets. The air grew cooler as they approached, and the sounds of the open range faded until even the horse's steps seemed too loud. Ethan stopped well before the edge and helped Lucy down. He didn't want her near the drop, didn't want her memory tied any tighter to this place than it already was. He told her to wait by a large rock, the same one she had mentioned before, and she nodded without argument. She was watching him closely now, as if she needed to see what he would do next to believe things could still turn out right. The ground told its story in pieces. Ethan followed faint tracks pressed into the dirt, some light, some deep, all moving in directions that didn't make sense if someone had simply wandered. Near a cluster of scrub, he saw the shoes. They were placed side by side, toes pointing toward the canyon, clean enough that dust hadn't had time to settle. No scuff marks, no sign of a struggle nearby. That bothered him more than if there had been chaos. A few steps away, half buried in gravel, he found the button Lucy had mentioned. It was small, plain, the kind sewn onto a coat without much thought. It shouldn't have been there. Buttons don't fall off quietly and land alone. Ethan turned it over in his fingers, feeling the sharp edge where the thread had torn free. He looked around again, slower this time. The canyon walls rose on either side, narrowing the light. Voices would carry here, so would footsteps. Anyone who knew the land would know that. Ethan walked back to Lucy and knelt in front of her. "You said there was a man," he said. "Tell me about him." She hugged her arms around herself. "He was nice," she said, then paused, her brow furrowing. At least he sounded nice. He talked like folks in town do when they want something. "What did he want?" Ethan asked. "He asked Mama where we were headed," Lucy said. "She said it wasn't his business. He laughed, like she'd made a joke, and said he was only being friendly." That word again. Friendly. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He had known men like that, men who wrapped their intent in soft words and smiles, men who relied on others not wanting trouble. "Did he say his name?" Ethan asked. Lucy nodded. "Caleb," she said. "Caleb Rourke. He tipped his hat when he said it." Ethan stood slowly. He knew the name. Not well, not personally, but enough. Caleb Rourke was the kind of man who drifted in and out of places, always with a reason that sounded reasonable. He worked with people who didn't ask questions and left before answers were needed. Nothing about him was openly wrong, which made him dangerous in a quieter way. Ethan walked the canyon's edge again, this time looking not for what was there, but for what wasn't. No signs of someone slipping. No marks showing panic near the drop. The shoes hadn't been removed in a hurry. They had been placed. That meant choice or pressure dressed up as choice. Lucy watched him, her face pale but steady. "Is Mama hurt?" she asked. Ethan considered his words carefully. "I don't know," he said. "But I don't think she just left you." Lucy nodded, as if she had already known that. She wouldn't, she said. She promised. They stayed there longer than Ethan meant to, the canyon holding its silence. He felt the weight of the place pressing on him, urging him to do what was easiest. Ride back, take Lucy to town, tell the marshal what he'd found, and let the matter leave his hands. That would have been the proper thing, the clean thing. But proper didn't explain the shoes. Clean didn't explain the button, and neither explained the look on Lucy's face when she spoke her mother's name. As they turned back toward the ranch, Ethan glanced once more into the canyon. He had the strong sense that whatever had happened there wasn't finished. It was paused, waiting. And now that he had seen the signs, walking away would mean carrying them with him for the rest of his life. Lucy climbed onto the horse again, holding tight. Ethan set his jaw and turned them home, already knowing that the quiet certainty he once lived by was gone. In its place was something heavier, something that asked more of him than he wanted to give, and less than his conscience would allow him to keep. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was already dropping toward the hills, stretching long shadows across the yard. Ethan helped Lucy down from the horse and guided her inside the house. The place smelled of old wood and coffee grounds, familiar and steady, the kind of space that usually kept the world at a safe distance. Tonight, it felt smaller. He poured her a glass of water and set out bread and beans, simple food he knew she would eat. Lucy sat at the table, her feet not quite touching the floor, watching him with a quiet focus that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't expected. She trusted him. That realization settled on his shoulders heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. "You can rest here," Ethan said. "I'll be back before it gets too late." Lucy looked up. "You promise?" The word caught him off guard. Promises had once been easy for him. They weren't anymore. He thought of the shoes by the canyon, of the polite smile Lucy had described, of the button lying alone in the dirt. Then he nodded. "I'll come back," he said. It was the most honest answer he could give. He showed her the small room at the back of the house, where the evening light came in soft through the window. She sat on the bed and held the glass with both hands. "If Mama comes back," she said carefully, "tell her I waited." "You can tell her yourself," Ethan replied, though the words felt thin even as he spoke them. Outside, he stood for a moment with the door closed behind him, listening to the quiet. The ranch had been his refuge since his wife passed, a place where days followed rules he could understand. Fix what's broken. Feed what depends on you. Don't look too far ahead. That way of living had kept him standing, but it had also kept him alone. He went to the small cabinet above the sink and took down the old revolver he hadn't touched in years. The metal felt colder than he remembered. As he checked it, his hands moved from habit, not desire. He set it on the table and stared at it longer than necessary. In his mind, another table appeared, years ago, in a different house. His wife sat across from him then, her hands folded the same careful way Lucy's had been. She had asked him to come home earlier that night. He hadn't. He told himself he had work to finish, fences to mend. By the time he returned, the chance to keep that promise was gone. The memory rose without warning, sharp and unwelcome, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. That was the twist he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about a woman in trouble or a child who wandered onto his land. It was about the space between what he did and what he failed to do. About the quiet decisions that shaped lives without ever announcing themselves. Ethan pushed the memory aside and picked up the revolver. He slipped it into his saddlebag, then went to the barn and saddled the horse again. Each movement felt heavier than before, as if the night itself were asking him to slow down and reconsider. He stood in the yard, looking at the house. He could stay. He could take Lucy to town in the morning, tell the marshal what he knew, and let others carry the burden. That was the sensible path, the lawful one. No one would blame him. But he saw Lucy's face in his mind, the way she'd said her mother wouldn't leave without her. He saw the shoes placed neatly by the canyon's edge. He felt the old weight of regret press against his ribs, reminding him how long it lasted when he chose ease over action. Ethan walked back inside and knelt in front of Lucy. "I need you to listen to me," he said. "You're going to stay here tonight. Lock the door after me. If anyone comes by, you don't open it for them, not for anyone." Her eyes widened. "Are you going back there?" "Yes," he said. "I have to." Lucy hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. Her grip was small but sure. "Please don't forget," she said. "I won't," he answered. And this time, the words felt different. They felt like a choice. He mounted the horse and turned it toward the road, leading back to the canyon. The light was fading fast now, the sky burning low at the edges. As he rode, doubt followed him like a shadow. He didn't know what waited ahead. He only knew that turning back would leave him carrying another promise he hadn't kept. The horse picked up its pace, and Ethan led it. The path ahead was darker than he liked, but behind him was a life defined by what he had avoided. Tonight, he chose to ride toward what he could not undo. The canyon was already wrapped in shadow when Ethan reached the narrow bend where the rock walls pulled close. He tied the horse well back from the edge and continued on foot, moving slow and quiet. Every sound seemed sharper down there. The scrape of his boot, the shift of gravel, his own breath. He kept to the side where the stone offered cover, following the faint signs he'd memorized earlier, signs that now felt clearer with purpose guiding him. Voices drifted up from below, calm voices, the kind that spoke like nothing was wrong. Ethan eased closer until he could see the small camp tucked into a hollow. A low fire burned steady. 2 men stood nearby, relaxed, unhurried. One of them he recognized at once from Lucy's description. The hat tipped just right, the easy smile. Caleb Rourke. And there, sitting against a rock with her hands bound loosely in front of her, was Lucy's mother. She was alive. The relief hit Ethan so fast it almost knocked him off balance. Then he saw her face. Pale, tired, controlled. She was holding herself together the way people do when they refuse to let fear show. It took effort. He respected that. Caleb noticed movement and looked up. His smile came easy. "Evening," he called out. "You lost?" Ethan stepped into view, keeping his hands where they could be seen. "Looking for someone," he said. His voice surprised him by how steady it sounded. Caleb nodded, as if that made sense. "Aren't we all?" The second man shifted his stance, watching Ethan closely. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. "That woman," Ethan said, keeping his eyes on Caleb. "She has a child." Caleb sighed lightly, like a man disappointed by bad timing. "Always complications," he said. "We were just having a conversation." Lucy's mother lifted her head. Her eyes met Ethan's, and in that brief look, he saw both warning and hope. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. "Conversation ends now," Ethan said. Caleb chuckled. "You don't look like trouble," he replied. "You look like a man who wandered somewhere he shouldn't. We can all walk away from this without hard feelings." Ethan shook his head. "Not tonight." The air shifted. The easy tone faded just enough to show what lived underneath. Caleb straightened, his smile thinning. "You know," he said, "there are ways things work out if people mind their own business." Ethan took another step forward, "And there are ways they don't." For a moment, no one moved. The fire cracked softly. The canyon held its breath. Then Ethan acted. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He moved with the kind of certainty that comes when a choice has already been made. The second man reacted too late, distracted by the sudden change. Ethan closed the distance, forcing them back just enough to break their control of the moment. Caleb raised his hand slightly, surprise flashing across his face. "Now hold on," he said. "Let's not make this worse than it is." "It already is," Ethan replied. Lucy's mother stood when she saw her chance. She moved quickly, favoring one leg but staying upright. Ethan shifted to block her from the men, keeping himself between them without taking his eyes off Caleb. "You all right?" Ethan asked. She nodded. "I will be." Caleb's voice hardened. "You're making a mistake," he said. "This isn't your concern." Ethan thought of Lucy sitting at his table, feet dangling, trusting him without knowing why. "It is now," he said. The second man took a step back, calculating. Whatever he saw in Ethan's face made him rethink his odds. He looked to Caleb, then toward the canyon path. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Caleb hesitated, pride wrestling with sense. Finally, he tipped his hat again, slower this time. "You got lucky," he said. "Luck runs out." "Maybe," Ethan replied, "but not tonight." Caleb backed away, his eyes never leaving Ethan's, then followed his partner into the dark. When they were gone, the silence rushed back in. Lucy's mother let out a breath she'd clearly been holding for a long time. Ethan untied her hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We need to move," Ethan replied. "Your daughter's waiting." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. Together, they started the careful climb out of the canyon. Each step felt lighter than the last, not because the danger was gone, but because it had been faced. As they reached the top and the open land spread out before them, Ethan knew something had changed. He hadn't just stepped into someone else's trouble. He'd stepped back into his own sense of right and wrong, and for the first time in years, it felt solid under his feet. Morning came slowly to the ranch, easing in with pale light and cool air that carried the smell of dust and grass. Ethan rode in just as the sun cleared the horizon, guiding the horse with one hand and steadying Anna Miller with the other. She was tired, but upright, her eyes fixed on the house ahead, as if it were something she wasn't sure she was allowed to believe in yet. The door opened before Ethan could knock. Lucy stood there in her nightshirt, hair messy from sleep. For half a second, she stared, confused, and then she saw her mother. "Mama!" She ran forward without hesitation. Anna dropped to her knees, catching Lucy in her arms, holding her so tight it looked like she was afraid the world might take her back if she let go. Lucy buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her small hands gripping the fabric of her coat. "I waited," Lucy said into her mother's chest. "I know," Anna replied, her voice unsteady but sure. "I knew you would." Ethan turned away and gave them space. He busied himself with the horse, though his hands shook more than he liked. He hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying until he felt it lift. Some things didn't need words. They just needed to be seen. Anna stayed at the ranch that day, and the next. Ethan suggested town, the marshal, a formal report. She agreed, but not right away. She needed rest. Lucy needed quiet. The marshal came out himself after a message was sent, listened carefully, asked questions, and nodded when Ethan spoke. He didn't promise much, but he promised enough. After that, life didn't return to how it had been. It shifted. Anna helped in small ways at first, cooking meals, mending what needed mending. Lucy followed Ethan everywhere, asking questions about cattle and fences, about why the sky looked different at sunset. The ranch filled with sounds Ethan hadn't heard in years, footsteps that weren't his, laughter that caught him off guard, the scrape of a chair pulled back for someone else. At night, when the house was quiet again, Ethan would sit on the porch and think. He thought about how close he'd come to doing nothing, about how easy it would have been to tell himself that someone else would handle it. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd been given a second chance to choose differently. One evening, Anna joined him outside. The sky was wide and clear, stars starting to appear. "You didn't have to do what you did," she said. "I know," Ethan replied. She looked at the land, at the fence line stretching into the dark. Most people wouldn't have. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say to that. Days turned into weeks. Anna and Lucy talked about leaving more than once. They had family farther east, a place to go. Each time, the words came easier, and each time, the leaving didn't. What began as gratitude settled into something quieter and deeper: trust, routine, belonging. One afternoon, Lucy asked a simple question while they were fixing a loose board. "Can we stay?" she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan froze, the hammer resting against the wood. He looked at Anna, who hadn't spoken but hadn't looked away either. He realized then that he wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. He was afraid of losing what had found him. "If you want to," he said finally. That night, the three of them ate dinner together at the small table, the lamp casting warm light across worn wood. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was, but it was honest. And it was enough. Later, after Lucy had gone to bed, Anna stood in the doorway and looked back at Ethan. "You gave us more than help," she said. "You gave us a place." Ethan nodded. "You gave me one too." The ranch didn't change much after that. The work stayed the same. The land stayed rough and demanding. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was shared. And sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the wind moved through the grass just right, Ethan would think about how one small voice by a water trough had undone years of careful distance. How choosing to stop, to listen, to act, had built something that couldn't be measured in miles or fences. Some stories begin with a loss. Others end with one. This one began with a choice, and it kept choosing him back.